I'd like to give a type of gallery talk to you by addressing each of the paintings, and by talking about these paintings, you're going to learn a great deal about the life of Clementine Hunter. Clementine was born in December or January of 1886 or 1887. She died on January 1st, 1988, at almost 102 years of age. It was always her goal to live as long as her maternal grandmother, who lived to be 110, but she didn't quite make it. But she had a very full and productive life. I didn't meet Clementine until June 11th of 1975, when I had occasion to speak at a university in a city in northwestern Louisiana called Natchitoches. Natchitoches is where the film Steel Magnolias was filmed, if you remember that movie with Julia Roberts and Dolly Parton and so on. When I would visit Natchitoches to see Clementine, and I would call to see if it was okay for me to come out to the come out to her home, I'd invariably ask if there was something I could bring along, and invariably she would say, yes, you can bring me some Kentucky Fried Chicken and a bottle of Muscatel wine. And so you can see the caption for this painting, Colonel Sanders Couple. This was my name for this painting because of her predilection, because of her preference for Kentucky Fried Chicken. You can tell from the signature that this painting would have been done prior to 1958. As she advanced through her painting career, she changed her signature several times. So it's by knowing how she signed her paintings that we have a pretty good idea as to when the painting was done. Clementine gave birth to 7 babies. 2 were stillborn. She raised 5. The oldest was Joseph, called Frenchie, who was born in 1907, if I remember correctly. I was in Louisiana when Frenchie came home from San Francisco to die, and I remember the occasion, very vividly. This is Clementine's recollection of her son, the soul of her son, leaving. These are called oven tombs. The water level was so high in the ground in Louisiana that you really couldn't bury people in the earth, because the water would just push the coffin right up and be floating again on top of the ground. So they have these tombs that are above ground, and they take the top off, put the body in, and then by law it has to be sealed for 1 year, and then the next family member that dies, they just open it up and put the next body in. The bones just fall down to the bottom. That's the way it's done. But anyway, this is the soul of Frenchie leaving the oven tomb and entering heaven through that hole in the sky. This was a very difficult time for Clementine, and after she painted this painting of this occasion, she never referred to Frenchie anymore, never painted anything reminiscent of Frenchie anymore. This is St. Augustine Catholic Church. It was founded by Creoles of color, half white, half black. Clementine considered herself a Creole, but she really wasn't. She was way too dark-skinned to be a Creole. And consequently, because the Creoles thought the church was for Creoles, Clementine even though she wanted to attend there, she wasn't always welcome there. But she is buried in the cemetery here at St. Augustine's Catholic Church. This is an early painting. It's called Gourd Harvest. There was a man who came to visit at Melrose Plantation in the year 1939, and he stayed until 1970. So he visited for 31 years, a very, very long visit. And he was a very good gardener. He was truly a Renaissance man. You know, he was interested in everything, did everything. He was a writer. He was a botanist. Most of all, he was a promoter, because he's the one that really promoted Clementine. His name was Francois Mignon. And Francois loved to grow gourds. And, you know, he went through the whole process of not only planting and cultivating, but also drying and then using them as decorations. And it's quite a process to, you know, to preserve a gourd so that it doesn't rot after it's been picked. But he went through that whole process and used them as he decorated buildings with them. There was one building called the Peacock House that had gourds hanging all around it from the eaves. This is, you know, there's a lot of activity in this painting. That's the African house. I'm going to tell you more about that house a little bit later, but you see the gourds being picked and transported. And Clementine was kind enough to also give us a cabinet from inside the manor house, the plantation house. And you see some gourds having been set inside that cabinet. This painting is not even signed. So this is one of her very first paintings. This would have been early 40s, prior to 1945. We have reason to believe that she did her first painting, her first known painting. She may have been messing around before this, but in 1939 she brought Francois a painting. And so that's the first official dating we have of any of her work. She wasn't shown publicly until 1945 in two cities in Texas, Waco and Brownwood. And it was at that point that her paintings began to be signed, not by Clementine, because she didn't know how to sign a painting, but for her. Now this one isn't even signed, so we can assume safely that this was a very early work. Boating on Cane River. This whole area where Clementine lived was called Cane River Country. The Cane was originally the Red River, but the Red River kept changing its course every time there was a bad flood. And so the original course after the Red began to flow at another place was named Cane River, and then eventually it was dammed and it became Cane River Lake. And it was called cane because of all of the canes that grew out of the water. When they are in profusion, they're called cane breaks. So there were all kinds of cane breaks, and that's what this is. This is one of her signature paintings. You know, a signature painting is one that you associate with a particular person. This is Fishing on Cane River. You see the cane breaks right there. Clementine, of course, is a primitive artist. Knew nothing about perspective. The way she showed perspective was by a technique called stacking or leveling. This is not something that she originated. The Egyptians used this commonly in their artwork, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. This is moving day. The plantation was sold in 1970, so everyone had to move from the plantation. Francois moved to Natchitoches. All of the workers were let go. They just had to begin a new life. This is Clementine's cabin. It never looked that good, but Clementine was an electronics freak, and whenever anything new in the way of electronics came on the market, she was one of the first to purchase. And so I think we can assume that that's her cabin with the television antenna. These men here are carrying trunks, it appears. Those are pecan trees. Melrose Plantation was a pecan plantation. It's the 5th largest pecan grower in the state of Louisiana. This is called Ladies in Calico. Now, Melrose Plantation is a National Historic Landmark, which means it has federal significance. When you're a historical site, that's more a state kind of thing. But when you're a landmark, that's more a federal kind of thing. And about 20,000 visitors come to Melrose every year. And I would say the majority are young people, school children, transported from all over. Then, in addition, in June, they have the Melrose Arts and Crafts Show. It's a two-day do, and that attracts about 10,000 people to the plantation. And then in October, they have a two-day, what they call the Natchitoches pilgrimage. And that's what we see here. It's hosted by these Ladies in Calico. These are members of the Association for the Preservation of Historic Natchitoches, the organization that owns and operates Melrose Plantation. These 5 people are tourists, they're visitors. Francois always referred to them as pilgrims. This is the manor house. It was built 1833. These 2 structures, they have a 6-sided roof, octagonal roof. Those are called garçonnières. It's a French word. It means boys' room. And you frequently found them on southern plantations. The Henrys, who owned Melrose between 1898 and 1970, had 7 boys and 1 daughter, and so the second floor bedroom in these 2 garçonnières were where the boys slept. Clementine Hunter was born on Hidden Hill Plantation. It was also called Little Eva Plantation. Now, if you remember, if you kids have read Uncle Tom's Cabin, you remember Little Eva was the daughter of Mr. St. Clair. Little Eva died before Mr. St. Clair did. Little Eva was a very close friend of Uncle Tom when Uncle Tom was owned by the St. Clairs, who lived in New Orleans. But then after Mr. St. Clair died, then of course Uncle Tom was put on the market and was sold. Well, Harriet Beecher Stowe, whose book Uncle Tom's Cabin was published, I'm telling you more than you want to know, I know. was published in 1852. The Civil War began in 1861, so this was 10 or so years prior to the Civil War. And the publication of that book really stirred up a lot of anger in the South, and of course in the North too, who just shook their heads at all of these horrible things that Harriet Stowe told them all about. There was a lot of controversy as to who this Simon Legree person was, and where specifically was Uncle Tom beaten to death. Well, there's no question in my mind, on the basis of the research that I've done, that Hidden Hill Plantation, Little Eva Plantation, was where Uncle Tom was murdered, was killed, was beaten to death by Simon Legree and by Sambo and Quimbo. The owner of this plantation was Robert McAlpin, and I'm convinced that he was the real-life model for Simon Legree. Clementine said it was not a happy place. Clementine said it was a place where the birds never sang. And here's stacking again. That's a flower garden, or leveling. Uncle Tom, this would have been Topsy. Not Little Eva, that's Topsy. Again, Clementine couldn't read or write. What she knew about Uncle Tom's cabin was what she had been told. And she didn't quite have her facts, in order, but that's all right. It's called artistic license. Uncle Tom's original cabin had all of those flowers growing on the front of it, if you remember the book. This is called a gooster. That's Clementine's creation. It's a hybrid, a cross between a goose and a rooster. That's a wake. Clementine was raised Catholic. She attended Catholic school about 10 days. Didn't like it, kept running away. Sister Benedict, she talked about a Sister Benedict who was so mean. And apparently the straw that broke the camel's back was when Sister Benedict found some meat in Clementine's lunch basket on a Friday, which was supposed to be Meatless Friday. Clementine was born Catholic. She had children by two different men. The first was Charlie Dupree. They never married. They had two kids together. Then she married Emmanuel Hunter, and that's where she acquired the Hunter surname, of course. And he was Baptist, so that's why the pictures that have a religious theme, even though Clementine was Catholic, they're, for example, the baptisms are Baptist baptisms. A characteristic of a primitive painter is that small objects are made disproportionately large. It's a significant characteristic. This painting was acquired not too long ago. This is a honky-tonk, a beer joint out in the country. This is a big wall fan, common in the South. Have one on this side of the building, have one on the other side of the building. One pulls in fresh air, the other pushes out stale air. Believe me, this beer joint doesn't look nearly this good in reality. This place still operates. I visited it last summer. It has a sign on it, McTwire Brothers, established 1942. I can show you some photographs over in my bag later of the real honky-tonk. But you can see this is where they gathered on their Friday nights and Saturday nights when they had a little jingle in their pocket. You can see looks like she's being stabbed and the blood is gushing. This one is pulling this person's hair. This man has knocked this one down. He's bleeding from the mouth. He's bleeding from the mouth. This one is drinking by himself. He's drinking seated next to a tree. This is a little table. There are only two kinds of beverages that are served here: beer in cans and muscatel wine in bottles. He's administering the coup de grace to this man here. You can see looks like a machine gun, really. The bullets in midair, and this is the coroner, apparently coming to investigate the murder of this man. In 1958, Clementine decided that a conventionally made C wasn't very friendly because the letter C had its back towards you. So she decided C would be more friendly if it were reversed, as if it had open arms and was welcoming you. So we know that when the C is reversed, that this would be a post-1958 painting. And then during the years, as the years passed, this C became superimposed on the H. She kept moving it farther to the right, and when she died, it was way over to the right. Oh, I should say, Clementine did enjoy going to the honky-tonk, too. And one of the stories is her leaving the honky-tonk, probably weaving a little bit, and she knocked her wig off, and everyone thought that was so funny. So, this is the Nativity. This is Mary, and this is baby Jesus seated beneath a banana plant. It's not banana tree, they're plants. It's a banana plant. These are the guardian angels. And if you ask Clementine, why is their hair like that? And she would say, your hair would be like that too if you were flying through the air. This is the stable. She referred to it as Jesus' house. These are the three wise men. And this one has a birthday cake, and this one has a box of candy, and this one has a squash, a Louisiana squash called a cushaw, no gold, frankincense, and myrrh. It's one of my favorite paintings. Lady with a pipe. This is a very early painting. This is 1950. This is another one of her signature paintings. You see, Clementine was born at Hidden Hill. Then, when Clementine was about 15, her parents moved the family to Melrose Plantation. Now, that would have been about 1902. Now, in 1898, 4 years previously, a young married couple took ownership of Melrose Plantation. Now, you know, the Civil War ended in 1865, and then there was a period called Reconstruction that was 12 years in length. And during that period of Reconstruction, the South was under the supervision of the North. They had to go through this period, and if things went well, after 12 years, then those states could rejoin the United States. And I'm sure you've heard about all the carpetbaggers. The people would come down and steal one way or another, rob, whatever they could do. It was a horrible period for the South. Well, because Louisiana was one of 11 Confederate states, so much was destroyed. The plantations were burned. The machinery was broken. The animals, the stock, killed. There really wasn't much left. Well, this young couple in 1898 who moved on to Melrose, it was their desire to restore the plantation to the kind of prominence that it had enjoyed prior to the Civil War. They wanted to restore the productivity of the soil. They wanted to rebuild the buildings. But of course, the slaves were all freed, so they had no labor. So they had to hire a labor force. And it was that fact that caused the Reuben family, Clementine's parents, to move from Hidden Hill to Melrose, because they wanted to work for the Henrys, because the Henrys did have considerable means. They could pay their workers. Well, when Clementine came to Melrose, she picked up right where she had left off as far as what her work responsibilities were. Her father was a sharecropper at Hidden Hill, and Clementine spent all of her time in the fields. Well, the same thing happened after they went over to Melrose. Here was a cotton plantation, a pecan plantation, a sugar plantation, and that's the kind of work that Clementine did. Clementine spent the first 50 years of her life as a field hand, picking cotton and picking pecans, helping with sugar, helping process sugar cane, grow it, that sort of thing. This is one of her signature paintings called Cotton Picking. One of those could have very well been Clementine. You can see the impasto that's used. This is a wedding. Clementine didn't think much of the Baptist minister, so that's why he was always a little short guy. She'd say he was a little low man, low, L-O-W. Generally, the women in her paintings are more dominant appearing than the men. Clementine said she never found a man that was able to take care of her. She always ended up taking care of her husbands, or Charlie Dupre died shortly after they were married. Emanuel Hunter was very sick, died in 1944. Clementine had to spend the last 10 years of her life nursing him. She, through her paintings, she was able to represent, the strength of the woman in her experience as far as plantation life is concerned. Of course, this is a birthday cake, and this is kind of combining the wedding with the reception following the wedding. Clementine said she's serving beer, so they serve beer at this reception. This is probably the most significant painting in the whole collection. Very early, 1940. This painting was one of 20 that was exhibited at the Saturday Gallery in St. Louis in 1952. It was Clementine's first one-person exhibition. And when you think it was a Southern black during this period, which was still 12, 13 years before the Civil Rights Act, when there was no mixing of races. This is called Dreaming Flowers. It has another name, Lyle and Francois' Hideaway. That's the original manor house, main house of Melrose Plantation. Melrose had another name prior to 1898. It was called Yucca, and so that's called the Yucca House. And then when the new house was built in 1833, this house served other purposes. This house is a bousselage construction. I don't know if you know the meaning of that term. It's a Louisiana type of construction. What it was this. The walls, they use cypress wood, which of course is local, red. Cypress is like redwood. It doesn't rot ever, even if it was standing. Well, it grows in water, so obviously it's not going to rot. They used cypress posts for the walls, vertical, of course. Then they had a cross piece. It was called a stringer. And then they took mud from the bottom of the river and mixed it with Spanish moss and bear hair and deer hair. That was the binder, that held everything together. And then they took that mud mixture and slapped it between these cedar posts. And of course it dried and became, hard, rock hard, harder than adobe. So that's a bousselage house. It had bars on the windows to keep the bear out. Francois and Lyle were lovers, and apparently this is where they would rendezvous, in this garden. This has, to me, many characteristics of Impressionism, a Monet-type quality to an extent. This people is on a cardboard box, on the side of a cardboard box. You can see the fold in the box. At 1952, this painting was advertised for sale at that Saturday gallery I was telling you about for $65. And today it would be, $20,000, $25,000. The funeral, you can see Clementine's goof. You see the sky coming down to the top of the church over to the right, but it doesn't quite go all the way across the heavens. That's St. Augustine's Catholic Church. That's a bell ringer. You see the casket bearers, and these ladies are carrying the wreath, which was considered an honor. To be asked to carry a wreath was a special recognition. These are grave diggers here. It looks like this person is going to be buried in the ground, which was the exception rather than the rule. This building, the African House, is circa 1800. That was built in 1796, about 4 years before this building was built at Yucca Plantation, which became Melrose Plantation. This is one of the most significant structures in the South. It's the only example of original African architecture that you'll find in the United States. This type of construction is what you found in the Congo area, from which most slaves were taken. and brought to this country. It's a two-story building. This is the slave jail on this side. You see, when you bought a slave, the slave was kind of on probation for 2 years. And when you signed this contract, you pledged that you would, not abuse the slave. You would not let the slave run away. So in order to ensure that the slave would not run away, plantations frequently had jails, not just for unruly slaves, but to make sure that during this period to see if they were going to be loyal so that they wouldn't run away. And if after 2 years, you just couldn't do anything with this slave, then you had the right to get your money back. So slave jail on this side, and then provisions were stored here on that side. And then there was also a second floor. And in 1955, during the summer of 1955, it took her 7 weeks, she painted a mural on the second floor of the African house that was 51.5 feet long and 4 feet wide, called the African House Mural. And there are many who refer to the second floor of the African house as the most colorful room in the South. It's an incredible piece of work. It's almost like painting the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And those are drying gourds.
What kind of paint is she using? Oil? Is she painting oil?
Always oil.
Always oil.
Initially people thought that she did some watercolor, but her desire to paint was so great, and she was getting 25 cents a painting, and so supplies were always in short supply, and so consequently she would thin her paint so much that it almost appeared as if it might be watercolor. This period, 1962-63, represented a real shift in the nature of Clementine's paintings. After 1963, her paintings became much more of a formula-type effort. She just concentrated on 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different paintings. For example, like the baptism. She probably did 500 of those in her life. Each one different, but still the same images. And those paintings really fell into 4 categories. There were those that had to do with work. There were those that had to do with play. There were those that had to do with religion. And then there were the still lifes. And this would have been one of her still lifes. Clementine named this one. She took this painting to Francois, showed it to him, and said, "Well, that's very, very interesting, Clementine, but what I particularly like about it is the fact that, you don't show any of the side views of any of the blossoms." And Clementine said, "No, sir, Mr. Francois, those zinnias is looking at you." So that's the name of this painting, Zinnias Looking at You. Miss Cammie died in 1948. Her husband died in 1918, very early. After Cammie's husband died, the planter of the plantation became their son, one of their 7 sons. His name was John Hampton Henry Jr. He died in 1969. The descendants apparently could not figure out a way to divide the property, so it was put up for sale in 1970. all the buildings were stripped. You know, Clementine didn't have murals only in the African house. Clementine had murals in Yucca House. Clementine had murals in Ghana House. Clementine had murals in Peacock House. All of those murals were taken off the walls, cut into pieces, and sold individually at auction. This is Clementine's recollection of auction day. This is Clementine right here. This is one of her paintings. Francois didn't even attend because he was so sad and because he was being pushed off the plantation. He went to Natchitoches, and some friends gave him a home in which to live for the next 10 years. He died in 1980. Called his new house New Haven, New Home. Here's a very early work. See, it's on cardboard. You can see the break up there on the cardboard. This is on construction paper, manila paper. Clementine painted on anything and everything because there weren't canvas boards. She painted on masonite. She painted on sheetrock. That double hung painting right there is canvas, like the kind of canvas you throw over a load of cotton to keep it dry. She painted on glass. She painted on wood. Anything and everything that would take an image. There's an interesting point to be made about this work. This is called Hobo. You can see the hobo's an amputee. Probably lost his leg in a war or accident. He probably asked, Miss Cammy is the only person Clementine ever painted who wore a bonnet. Everyone else wore a hat. This hobo probably asked Miss Cammy for something to eat. It was common during that period of time, the 30s and 40s, for hobos to knock on the back door of a home and ask if they might have some food. It was just common during that period of time. Remember, I said her first public exhibition was in 1945, but she wasn't signing her paintings. So one of her promoters, James Register, thought that her paintings would have more credibility if they were signed. So he signed for Clementine using the shortened version of her baptized name. She was baptized Clementium, Latin, pronounced Clementium, and so Clementine shortened it to Clemence, and that's what this is, Clemence. Then, when a painting that James Register signed reappeared and Clementine saw it, then she signed it again. So that's why this is a double-signed painting, but this is the signature that you use in dating the work. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? This is an early baptizing prior to 1958. Catholics would immerse. It's not that they never baptized by immersion. It could be done, but generally it would be the Baptists that baptized by immersion. Signature painting, you see lots of these. But this is an early one. This is a very early painting. Woman walking into Louisiana sunset. I can't imagine Clementine came up with that with that title. This is pecan picking. This is the one that was in the UNICEF children's calendar. Using a stick to knock the pecans down. The women were picking them off the ground. They sent the kids into the climb into the trees to shake the branches. Now they have a machine that grabs the trunk of the pecan tree and just shakes the whole tree. This is a precious piece, to me anyway. It's called Birds in a Zinnia Tree. And what this is one of those dime store mirrors, those cheap mirrors, and the glass was broken, so Clementine painted on the paper backing. This one happens to be dated. We know of the existence of about 20 of her tapestries or her hangings. She did do quilts for cribs, for small beds, but this is a tapestry. This is a wall hanging. It's called a rope quilt, R-O-W, or a block, B-L-O-C-K, quilt. The backing was either cloth flour sacks that had been bleached, or in this case, it's brown paper grocery bags are the backing, so that it'll hang. These are called appliques. This is an appliqued tapestry, where pieces of cloth are cut out and arranged to form a particular image. That, of course, is the manor house, and this would be the Yucca house, St. Augustine's Catholic Church, the African house, and this is probably the Ghana house, which was a cypress log cabin. Predominant colors are green, red, and black, and that was very common because those are the three colors that are associated with revolution in Africa. And African countries that have gained their independence through revolution invariably use those three colors in their national flag. I guess Clementine is saying, who's to say that Jesus wasn't black? This is the first of these two that I acquired. This one came from a collection owned by a Dr. Robert Ryan, who is chief of surgery at Tulane University in New Orleans. He's now retired and is disposing. He has no heirs. His wife is deceased, has no children, so he's dispersing his collection. And I've been fortunate enough to be able to acquire several, including the zinnias, or the birds in a zinnia tree. This is Clementine's self-portrait. She said, "That's me." It's not very flattering, I don't think. I thought Clementine is a very, very attractive woman. This one is dated 1939, which contradicts the reverse C, which we know is post 1958. So I can't explain that. But again, you notice the characteristics of primitive work. Recently acquired this. This would have been late 50s, early 60s. Oh, I see we have a date, 1960. That's a gooster. You see the guardian angels, and that's Mary and baby Jesus being led by Joseph on their way to Bethlehem. One thing you may have concluded, generally you see only the profiles of people. Now here's a full frontal view of a person, but usually it's profile, it's side, with the exception of mules. She always shows a full-face view of a mule. Very few of Clementine's characters were ever white, except for Miss Cammie Miss Cammie's husband or son, John Hampton Henry, or the ladies in calico. Clementine would do commission work, not very happily, but on occasion, you could order a painting from her. And in James Wilson's book, over on that pedestal over there, you'll see a family portrait of the Britton family. It's just very, very interesting, very humorous. I know the family well. I think you might enjoy looking at that painting in that book of the Britton family. This is called the Good Darky statue. This particular sculpture was described in a National Geographic magazine several years ago. Unfortunately, I haven't yet found a copy of it. A judge in the city of Natchitoches wanted to pay tribute to the role that black people played in the development of the city and area. So he commissioned the sculpting of this sculpture, and it was placed on Main Street in Natchitoches at the most important crossing. And it remained there until the 60s when, because of the objections of the black residents, it was removed. It still exists. I believe it's in North Carolina, standing at the entrance to a plantation. I think I heard that story. Talk about artistic license. This stood in the center of Natchitoches, and she put in the African house, which was 15 miles away. This is one of my very favorites. The red angels are fallen angels, devil angels. This work was commissioned by the state of Louisiana. Clement did 3 of these. Dr. Mildred Bailey ended up with 1. I ended up with 1. The 3rd one hangs in the State House in Baton Rouge, the capital. It's a lot of vignettes in the painting, cotton picking, goosters, cotton ginning, pecan picking, wash day. And this is the manor house, the African house, workers on the grounds. Signature tells us it's pre-58. We can tell some of the story through the paintings, but there's so much more, because you really can't understand the life of Clementine without understanding the lives of 2 other women, one being Marie Therese Coyne, who was a slave born in 1742, had 14 children, 10 with a white man, who eventually bought her and freed her. And she, together with those 10 Creole children that she had with Pierre Thomas Matuire, she was 44 years of age when she was freed. With her sons, she began to acquire land. Mr. Matuire gave her 67 acres of land when he freed her. She took those 67 acres of land, and in 1816 that family had 18 square miles of farmland and themselves owned 300 slaves. And these were the progenitors, the creators of the Creole colony in this area called Isle Breville, which was on the Cane River southeast of Natchitoches. Those people have been written about. They're frequently referred to as the Forgotten People, this Creole colony. And it all goes back to, it started with Marie Therese, born in 1742, a slave, who became the concubine of Pierre Matoyer. He bought her and freed her after they had had 10 children together. And eventually, she gained the freedom of all. You see, you couldn't just declare a person free, you're free. It had to go through a legislative process, through a governmental process. It just wasn't all that easy. But she went through that. She also was able to gain the freedom of 2 of her 4 black children that she had before she began to live with Pierre Matoyer. So, and the reason she's important to this whole story is that she's the one that started Yucca Plantation, which became Melrose Plantation. So you got to understand Marie Therese. You really have to understand Cammie Henry as well in order to understand Clementine Hunter. So those people are sources of so many fascinating stories, and then you have these 11 buildings, and every one of those buildings tells a story. Well, Clementine's talents, her creative genius, were absolutely limitless. You see her as a quilter, which is certainly an art form. You see her as a painter. Well, she also illustrated a children's book. This book, called The Joyous Coast, is a fable. It was written by James Register. You've heard me mention Francois Mignon. Well, there was another promoter, and his name was James Register. James and Francois were buddies, though they eventually became enemies. James Register was a professor at the University of Oklahoma, and he would come to Melrose Plantation during the summer to do research for his writing. And he wrote this book. And this is one of the original paintings that appear in this children's book. It's called Gulp the Goose, Tom the Turkey, and Holler the Frog. You can see it was signed initially by James Register. It reappeared and was signed later by Clementine Hunter. This is an early cotton picking. When these sacks became too heavy, they would take some of the cotton out and put it in these baskets. And then when they got to the end of the row, well, here you see the baskets of cotton. That's just the overflow from these baskets when they became too heavy to pull before they would weigh them. Her original genre was primitive art. In 1962-63, she was introduced to a new genre, abstraction. James Register, who thought Clementine was an absolute genius, wanted to see if he could test the bounds, the depth of that genius, to see what else she could do, how else she could do it. So what he did was to pull colored pages from slick paper magazines like Life and Look and Collier's and Saturday Evening Post, pages that had a lot of color, probably advertisement pages. He took scissors and cut those pages into irregular shapes, and then he taped all those irregular shapes on a canvas board, you know, certain size, and asked Clementine what those colors and what those shapes made her, you know, what she could picture with those. What did she think about them? What did they make her want to say with paint? And so in 1962-63, she did about 100 of her so-called abstracts. And I'm fortunate enough to have 6 of them. There are 2 more down at the Toynton, if you kids happen to get down there. I recently purchased these 2 from Dr. Ryan. It's Mr. and Mrs. Mardi Gras. Mardi Gras, of course, is a carnival. And you've all heard about the New Orleans Mardi Gras, I'm sure. This is a pair. These, one of the few instances where she had a paired group of paintings. That's Banana Nose. That's one of her more prominent abstracts. And this one, which I dearly love, is a blind woman looking at a vase of flowers. Clementine, how do you know she's blind? Well, she ain't got no eyes. And this is one of her popular abstracts. At the end of 1963, she declared, I ain't going to do any more. They make my head sweat. And she never painted another abstract. Then she went back. And that's why I said 1962-63 really was a kind of a watermark, because after this, then she went, you know, to her religious, her work, her play, and her still lifes, and concentrated on those. There wasn't very many more one-of-a-kind kind of painting. She did do glass work. Well, she painted on anything. People would bring out iron pots and she would decorate them. But those 2 small bottles were her snuff bottles. She dipped snuff. She painted right up until her death. She was still painting in December of 1987. And as I mentioned to you, she died on January 1st. And the news of her death was carried by the wire services all over the country, all over the world.